So as Ethan explained, I'm going to focus more on a historical review of what happened in the years before the strike happened in Quebec. Because oftentimes in the rest of Canada and outside of Quebec in general, people seem to think that what happened this past spring was a spontaneous movement. It wasn't, actually. It was prepared for a long time. And so that gets me to the very start of when it happened, which is in April 2010, actually a little before, when the budget was announced by the former Prime Minister, not the Prime Minister, but the Minister of Finance, Raymond Bachand at the time, that announced a budget that contained a series of austerity measures, including, of course, the tuition hike, but including also, for example, health tax. That was it was a big first in the Quebec's health system to impose a tax. So at the time, and even before the budget was announced, people in the student movement, especially in the class, decided to organize to fight against these austerity measures, and of course to fight specifically against the tuition hike. So what we did at the time was we went to see some community groups, a lot of them, environmental groups and feminist groups, labor unions also, and we decided to join with them to form a big coalition that we called, in English we say Red Hand Coalition, in French we say Coalition opposée à la tarification et la privatisation des services publics. That's the French word. So, for those who understand French. So, we started to mobilize in partnership with these other social groups against the budget. But in fact, what happened is that all of the groups got together and decided to work all towards the same goal, which was to block the hike of the tuition fees. Instead of working separately on different issues. So we can say that the very beginning of this whole movement, the very big event was on the 1st of April 2010, when the day the budget was announced, where this coalition organized a big demonstration in Montreal that regrouped I think 30,000 people in the streets of Montreal, and a lot of students were also on strike for this specific day for the demo. So that's what gave the kickoff for the movement. Then, of course, what happened after this demonstration is that followed a big mobilization campaign and information campaign to educate the students in Quebec about the issue of the tuition hike. Because at the time, when we would go on the campuses, I would say that about 10 to 15% of the students on the campuses were actually aware and against the tuition hike. So a lot of them, the vast majority of them, were either not aware or in favor of the hike. So we had to do a lot of education. We would not only go in the campuses, for example, in the cafeterias to speak to people and distribute a huge amounts of flyers, but we would also organize some workshops in the universities and in the cégeps. We would go in the classes, do some speeches to inform the people of what was happening. We would, that's it. So we did some information campaign, basically. And then, so that was for the whole semester that followed the budget announcement, and for the semester that was the fall that followed. So for, fall 2010. And then the mobilization went on, and not also that we organize some mobilization and information campaigns, but we also organized, we started to mobilize to put some pressure on the government by doing some actions. So at first we would start by smaller actions, for example, signing some petitions against the tuition fees hike. doing some visibility actions, dropping some banners, doing some sit-ins either in the universities or in the public areas, so that we would get the attention of the media. And after, we went on with more direct actions, or by organizing some smaller demos about the tuition increase, against the tuition increase. So it went on, and in May 2011, we realized that the government was still not listening to us, and so that maybe we would have to go further. So what we did as class was we decided to organize a big meeting in Quebec City that would reunite all of the local student unions of the movement to talk about the hike and the strategy that we would use to fight against it. So in this meeting, not only the unions that were member of the class, or the AC at the time, but also all of the student unions that were member of the FEC and the FERC, which are the two other national student organizations, or federation if you want, in Quebec, and also all of the independent ones that are not either a member of the class or the FEC and the FERC. So basically everybody was there. And the purpose of this meeting was not only to talk about the tuition increase, to encourage maybe less mobilized unions to have some discussion about it in their campuses, but also to talk about the very issue of the strike. Because in our campuses, people started to think about it a lot. It's in the culture of the class to fight by organizing some strikes when it's necessary. So people thought about it for a few months at the time. And so we had, started to have some reflection about that, and we wanted to share our reflections with the other local unions, and we wanted them to initiate some reflections in their own campuses, because we knew that we couldn't strike alone. If we had to, we would need the help of the other unions, of course. So at the end of this meeting, what happened is that we decided together to organize a big demonstration again that would be on the 10th of November of 2011. And the purpose of this big demonstration was to tell the government that it was to give the government an ultimatum, saying, if you don't back off on your decision of increasing the tuition fees, we are going to go on an unlimited general strike at the winter. So that was our big warning. And of course, the government didn't listen to us at the time. We were again 30,000 people in the streets on this day, people from all of the student unions, and we were more than 100,000 people, well, students, on strike this particular date to tell the government that we were against the hike and that we were ready to go further. Of course, when we took this decision of doing an ultimatum, we weren't naive, because we knew that probably the government wouldn't listen to us, and we knew that oftentimes, if you want to fight against the measure that the government has taken, some discussions are not enough, and maybe you have to force the hand. Oftentimes, if you want to have what you think is just. So what we did is that we, after the 10th of November, when the government decided to not back off, we started some mobilization campaigns, not only on the tuition increase issue, but also on to legitimate the method of the strike in itself. Because on the campuses at that time, most of the people had been informed and educated about the tuition hike, but not all of them. In fact, a minority of them were in favor of doing a strike, because a strike involves a lot of personal sacrifices. So we had to legitimate the method of the strike in itself. So we started that after the 10th of November, 2011. And then, so when we got back to school after the winter holidays, everybody on our campuses, every student knew that a strike was possible, knew that it was probably coming, and even the people that weren't maybe in favor of it, at least had some debate and discussions on the strike, and a lot of them at the time were convinced. So we began a very, very intense, and we didn't have a lot of time, so we began a very intense mobilization campaign about the strike. So we went in every student union all over Quebec, not only in Montreal, to start the strike. So it worked. The strike in the first student unions was launched in February, in the middle of February, and it took some expansion in the weeks and months that followed. And as you know, the strike went on and on. There were lots of protests on the 22nd of every month, especially. And then the government, on the 18th of May, I think, announced the special law that maybe you've heard of. And it was an extremely unconstitutional law that that was announced by the government to try to stop the strike. You know, what it did, well, there was a whole lot of measures in that law, but basically what it did is that it suspended the semester, so basically it suspended the strike. And also, it was imposing lots of repressive measure to keep people from doing some protests and some picket lines on the campuses. So when this law was adopted, it was on the 18th of May. And so 4 days later, we knew that there would be a big protest, as usual, on the 22nd of the month. So what we said is, well, we had a Congress and decided to maintain our usual habits, let's say, of doing a big protest on the 22nd, and we decided that we would not follow the restrictions of the law, meaning that we wouldn't give some information about the protest, the route and everything to the police. So basically what we announced is that we were going to break this law on the 22nd of May. And the 22nd of May was the biggest demonstration of all of the big 22nd demonstrations. There were near 3,100 people, 300,000 people in the streets of Montreal on that day. So obviously, we were having an extreme support from all of the population, because these people that were in the street at the time weren't all students. And it's also, after that began the whole phenomenon of the casserole on the street that maybe you've seen on television. So that was the moment where we could see that the people of all of the population of Quebec was supporting us. So, and then the summer came, the movement went down a bit, and in the month of August, the elections were launched. We like to think that we have a part of responsibility in the election déclenchement, the launch of the election. And then, as you may know, the Liberals were beaten by the Parti Québécois of Pauline Marois, who decided to cancel the tuition hike and to abrogate the special law, which is for us a big victory. But, and I'll finish on that note, it's not over. What the PQ announced is that they were going to organize a summit on the funding of post-secondary education, in which the tuition hike is going to be discussed. And the PQ said that they were, well, it's not an official decision, but they said in the media that they were probably in favor of an indexation of the tuition fees, meaning that the tuition fees are proportional, like they increase proportionally to the cost of living. And of course, for us, this is a hike and we're going to be against it. We were always against the tuition hike in a perspective of free education. So for us, this is unacceptable, and we're going to have to keep mobilized to make sure that our opinion is listened to in the summit. But of course, well, we don't know how it's going to turn out, but we still have hope that it's going to not turn out too bad for us. So I'm going to let you with my colleague that you may know already, Nadeau-Dubois, which is the former spokesperson of the class, and he's going to make you a speech about how does the structure of the student movement works specifically.
Hi everyone, thank you for the invitation. I'm going to actually begin by doing a parenthesis that I want to do, because since this beginning of the tour, I have realized that there are a lot of, I think there is a big misunderstanding about what actually is a student strike. Because the media have said things that are not very accurate, our government also, so I think it's important to just to remind what we're talking about when we say that students are on strike, because it's not that obvious that it can look like. The first distinction that is important to do is to say that a strike is not a boycott, and that's very important, because one of the first ideological attack that our government did to us in the public debate was to say that we were actually not doing a strike but a boycott, and the difference is huge, because as you know, a boycott is an individual decision. You personally choose to buy Pepsi and not Coke, for example. And obviously, when we're talking about students being on strike, we are actually talking about what is called, for example, in the labor union movement, a strike. It means that this decision of stop going to classes is not taken individually by each student. It is taken collectively. And it is taken collectively by structures that I will explain further. But so when this collective decision is taken throughout our democratic structures, then it applies to everyone. And when the strike mandate is adopted by the students, it applies to all the members of the student union. It means that even if individually I voted against the strike, if I'm a member of a union that has voted the strike, I am not allowed by the union to go to my courses. In most of the cases, the administrations of universities spontaneously recognize the vote that is taken by the students. But after a few months of strike, because there was a lot of pressure on the semesters, we realized that, we don't realize, but in fact, the administration of the universities decided to suddenly stop recognizing the collective decision that was taken each week by the students to continue the strike. So then we had no choice but to do picket lines in front of our colleges and universities in order to be sure that the collective decision to go on strike was being respected for everyone. And obviously, those kind of measures to be sure that the strike mandate is respected is essential for the student union to keep its political leverage towards the administration and obviously the government. Because if you let the people who want to go to class go to their class, then obviously you are disadvantaging the people who actually choose to respect the democratic decision that was done to go on strike. And you have also to understand that what is effective what is actually effective in a student strike is the fact that massively classes are empty and that teachers and other university workers are being paid, but without no one, they are paid, but with no one in the classes and no one in the universities. And that's exactly where we're hitting the government, because when we're on strike, we're actually talking the language of government, which is money. And when we're on strike, we are making him lose tons and tons of money because he knows, the government, that he cannot cancel a semester. Imagine only 1 second what it would represent on a purely logistical point of view to say we have 150,000 students who won't graduate and stay in university, and you have the same amount of high school students entering the university. It would be totally impossible to manage it. They would literally have to build new universities to make everyone fit, and obviously that's impossible. So the strike is effective because the government knows they absolutely can't cancel the semester. So after a certain time on strike, the pressure is so high that the government knows he has to do something in order for the students to go back into class. And if you don't hold picket lines to reinforce your strike mandate, well, obviously you lose all this political leverage. So I wanted just to begin with that parenthesis to explain what is a student strike and why is it actually effective to put pressure on the government? Because for us, and I think it's proven historically by the history of the Quebec student movement, the strike is the most efficient, the most effective tactic that students can possibly use. It is the ultimate step of any escalation of pressure for the student movement. So that being said, I'm going to try to explain a little bit how we actually work on a very day-to-day basis, because we have a very unique, I think, way to work, a way to work that is very different, and we have to admit it, very different to the way that student unions in the rest of Canada actually work. And I think that this structure is probably the first key of our historic success. To explain how it works, I'll take an example, because it's probably the most simple way to do it. Let's say that Ethan is a student in political science in the Université de Montréal and doesn't like the logo of the class. And he wants the logo of the class to become a blue bottle of water. So he says, because I don't like the red square, so I want a blue bottle of water as our symbol. So what does he do if he wants that individual position to become the position of class? Well, there are a few steps. If there is no strike actually going on, there is generally between 2 and 4 general assemblies by semester in each student union. A general assembly is not a meeting. And that is a very important difference to know. It's not a consultation space. It's a decision-making space. In fact, it's the ultimate and unique place in all the student movement in Quebec where decisions are actually taken. So Ethan goes to his General Assembly and he says, well, I have a proposition to make. I want the class logo to become a blue bottle of water. And obviously, there will be a lot of debate in his assembly about, is it really a good decision? But let's say he has really strong arguments, and he convinces a majority, not everyone, and that's, again, a very important distinction to make. If he is able to convince a majority of the assembly that it's a great idea, there will be a vote, and this proposition will be adopted by the Assembly, and it will become an official position of the Political Science Student Union of Université de Montréal, which is Ethan, a member like everyone else. 2 weeks after, there will probably be, in fact, there will certainly be a National Congress of Class, which is a coalition of particular student unions. And the Executive Council of Ethan's Student Association will send a delegation to that Congress. And this delegation will be, for example, between 2 and 4 delegates that will come to the Congress of Class to defend, and only to do that, to defend the positions that were adopted by their General Assembly, to defend the mandates that were given to them by their members in the General Assembly. So at one point, the delegates of Eton Student Association will raise their hand and say, well, as the Political Science Student Union of Université de Montréal has a proposition to make, we want the class logo to become a blue bottle of water. And then there will be a debate between each student union. And in this debate, each delegation and each delegate will not defend his own position, obviously. They will defend the position that has been previously adopted in their General Assembly about class logo. If they have a position adopted in their assembly that says that, no, we love the green square, the red square, and we want to keep it that way, they will vote in this way. Even if Eton's delegates have very good arguments, they will still be voting according to their mandate. If they have no position, if they never consulted their member on that issue, they will abstain. So they will be neutral in the debate, and they will abstain at the moment of the vote. And if they actually consulted their members and adopted the same position, they will vote in favor of it. And let's say it is adopted by the Congress of Class. Then the Executive Council, the Provincial Executive Council of Class will have to concretely apply this position, and they will have, for example, to ask to some people to draw a drawing of a blue bottle of water, and then print it, and then change the website, and then apply concretely the position that was taken by the Congress. I chose a very simple and funny example, but what you have to understand is that this process is highly respected for any decision that is taken by the class, by the coalition of the student unions. And it could look a little bit stupid as an example, but it's this process that makes that our movement is very democratic. And all the political decisions, all the strategic orientations are taken in this exact same process that gives to each student in Quebec the exact same power in order to control the student movement. So that's a little bit about the structure. Since I began this conference with my colleagues, everywhere I've been asked the same question. Everywhere people ask me, what is the key of the Quebec student movement? How do you do to mobilize so much students? And the answer for me, and I think we all agree on that, is the structure that I just described. One of the big lessons that we have learned historically as a student movement is that students, just as citizens or workers, won't be involved in any cause if they don't deeply feel that they control it and that they're actually part of every step of the decision-making process. So when Chloe told you the story of this 2-year escalation of pressure against the Charest government, what you have to remember is that each step of that escalation was voted by the students themselves. At each time, they voted to go to the next step. So there were never any surprise to see a member of their executive council or of their mobilization committee see them and actually inform them on the issue, because they were the one who had decided to do that at each moment of the strike. And I think it has become something cultural in the Quebec student movement. There is really a strong culture of that of direct democracy, a culture, and it's deeply inserted in each activist that our movement have to be completely controlled by the students and not by some staff and not by some executive member and not by some president or even by some spokesperson. And that's really important. But that structure, as you can see, is very heavy. It's a very heavy and long process. So the only way to make sure that it actually works, and the only way it works in Quebec, it's because this culture of democracy is being nourished by another culture that is a deep culture of work, of hard work. And once again, it can look very simple and stupid. I mean, we all know that we have to work if we want a success in organizing social movements. But you know, here I'm talking about thousands of activists that, you know, for 2 years have been there each morning at the doors of their universities, distributing hundreds of thousands of flyers, newspapers, posting posters everywhere in the wall of every university. Like Chloe said, at the beginning of this mobilization, between 10 and 15% only of the students were actually against the tuition increase. And we had to convince them one by one. And that leads me to the other parenthesis that I wanted to make. I think that one of the traps in which my generation could fall into is the trap of social media. It's the trap to think that social media can actually mobilize people. And that's totally false. Social media will inform you that there's a protest, but they will never convince you that it's relevant to go to a protest, and they will never convince you that tuition increase is a bad thing and that accessibility to education should be a priority. Social medias were unbelievably useful during our strike, but it was during our strike, when the strike had already begun, when the people were already mobilized. It was an unbelievable tool for them to organize themselves without having to always refer to the official structure of their student union. They didn't have to print anything. They could do a Facebook group and then have and it happened, 10,000 people protest wherever they want. But the social media never convinced anyone to vote for the strike, obviously. Because going on strike, like I explained it before, is a collective decision. But this collective decision has strong individual consequences. It means financial consequences. It means academic consequences. And you won't convince anyone of making those sacrifices with a tweet or a Facebook group. And I always want to say it everywhere I go, because I think those social medias can be very appealing to us, can look very easy, but it will never replace the fact that to build a social movement, you have to sleep not a lot and to kill a lot of trees. It's really important. So the final result of that culture of democracy and work is the fact that in Quebec, and I'm taking that from Ethan, that said this earlier this week, and I found it really brilliant. The result of that is that in Quebec, a lot of students see their student union as their first political vehicle. A good part of the students feel actually that their legitimate spokesperson in Quebec's public debate is their student union. A lot more than any political party. A lot more than any other group. Even a party, if they're a member of it, they will often feel that their first political representation on any issues, not only education issues, is their student movement, is their student union. Because they know that they control it, that it's their union, and that they are controlling his faith, his position, his action plans, and his political orientation. So that's the first reason why I think Quebec's student movement is so strong. Because we have this perfect match between democracy and structure. And I think sometimes a lot of people think that those are two things that are contradictory. That you have to choose between having a democratic movement working in direct democracy or a structured movement that has, let's say, a certain organizational power. the strength of the Quebec student movement is to have both. To have student unions who are recognized by the law, who have a representative power of all their members, who have a budget, who have people that are elected to apply the decisions of the students. But those organizations are powerful, but they are also very democratic. And it's that perfect match of those two things, democracy and structure, that makes, I think, our student union so efficient. The second reason why I think the student movement is so powerful is because of another, let's say, perfect match. A perfect match and a perfect equilibrium between having a very concrete, pragmatic, immediate demand, and also having, let's say, a more general and systemic discourse. I think it's once again one of the main challenge of a lot of social movements, to be able to find that equilibrium. A lot of social movements, including a lot of labor unions, fall in the first trap, that is to have only very specific and corporatist demand for their own members, and they will argue that those specific demands with arguments that relate to their own interests. And obviously, one of the main problems with that kind of strategies is that it blocks any perspective to transform that, let's say, sectorial mobilization into a popular struggle. Because the citizens in general obviously won't be mobilized for an increase of the salary of some workers in some factory. So if you're too focused on your own things, you block any perspective of transforming your movement into a popular struggle. But there's also another trap into, I think, a lot of social movements fall into, and it's to do the opposite. And I find it funny because a lot of student activists I've met during this tour are the very proof of that. Because sometimes the first question after our conference is, how did you do to do a strike against neoliberalism? And I always say, well, it was not a strike against neoliberalism, at least not at the first. Our slogan in class was very clear. It was, Ensemble, bloquons la hausse. Together, stop the hike. You cannot have more simple, concrete, and pragmatic demand. But we were not limited to that strict demand. We had also a general, systemic, and anti-neoliberal discourse that was not hiding that specific demand, but that was giving sense and meaning to that specific demand. And I think it's really a hard equilibrium to find between having an immediate demand that you can reach and a general discourse that gives meaning to your demand. Because, you know, like I said before, going on strike is a lot of sacrifice. And you will never convince anyone to go on strike and to do those sacrifices against an abstract idea. You know, okay, so you won't go to class until neoliberalism is destroyed. No one will do that. You will go on strike if you know that you will do sacrifices, but that those sacrifices will make that you will be able to actually win something. And it's because you are able to win something that we will be able as activists to go back to our membership and say, last time we did it and we won. And that's probably the main argument that we have in Quebec. We are able to say, this government has attacked us twice. In 2005, he attacked the bursaries and loans program, we went on strike and we defeated it. In 2012, he raised our tuition fees, we went on strike and we defeated it. And because we're able to have those examples, we're able to convince the students to do those sacrifices. But if you try to start your movement with that big ideological agenda, you won't be able to have any victories, and you will probably kill the possibility of having another movement after. But once again, I'm not saying that you have to only focus on your specific demand. It's surely, the idea that I'm trying to say is that it's really a question of, you know, walking on that thin line and being able to articulate your pragmatic demand into a more general discourse. And I think And I don't really know how, honestly, but I think we have been able to find that equilibrium this year in Quebec. And that's why we have been able to have a powerful student strike. And it's because that strike was powerful in the student movement that then, after it began, it transformed itself into a popular struggle. So I'm going to conclude on that. I think, once again, I've talked too much, but basically I wanted to finish on that and maybe finish on one story in which I always finish my speeches with. They are tired of hearing it, but I find it funny. When I began mobilizing for this strike in 2007, before it was even announced, because we know it was going to come. And I never believed that we could actually have a strike. But I remember the moment, the precise moment, where I realized that something was going on. I remember the precise moment where I said, okay, there's actually a student strike, but there's actually something else. And that thing is very big. And I remember there was a General Assembly, one of the first General Assemblies, and it was in the big cégep in Montreal, Cégep de Maisonneuve. And cégep has three main gymnasiums, three huge gymnasiums. And the assembly began, and we filled the first, and then the second, and then the third gymnasiums. And there are 3,000 students in this General Assembly to vote for the strike. So obviously we're so, like, we fear to lose the vote. We don't know, it's always like that with strike votes. And then I remember, before even the assembly began, the director of the security of the cégep comes to the mic and says, well, I have to warn you and to tell you a rule, a very important rule. When the assembly is going to be over, I will ask you not to move all together at the same time in the same direction, because the college, the building, is not built to have so much people in it at the same time. And if you all move together fast, it might like break the building. and that's a true story. And I remember that when I heard that guy said that, at that specific moment, I realized that something totally unhabitual was going on and not normal. Because I realized that our mobilization and the strike vote was not done yet. But just the only fact that 3,000 students were in the same place at the same time to have a huge, intense political debate and take a collective decision, just only that. And the fact that we were so mobilized that even our own schools were not built to live with such mobilization. Then I realized that something very weird was going on in Quebec, and I think that since then I'm from surprise to another surprise. So now I'll end here and obviously take your questions.